I'm Brian, here in the Old Salem town, the original Salem, North Carolina. This is the old Moravian, I don't know if you call it settlement, but certainly where the town started. Let's go take a look.
To better appreciate what we're going to be looking at today, it might be appropriate to understand just who the Moravians were and how they came here to North Carolina and established a settlement back in the 1760s. Going back more than 600 years to 1415, in the country we now call the Czech Republic were the regions of Moravia and Bohemia. It was here that a group of Christians took issue with some of the practices of the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, their protests were not received well by the Pope. The group's leader was arrested, tried, and found guilty of heresy. The church promptly burned him at the stake. No longer in the good graces of the Catholic Church, the followers were persecuted and sent fleeing. They settled in Saxony, which was in modern-day Germany. Eventually, they established missions in England, with the English calling them Moravians. However, they were still subject to persecution. In their pursuit of religious freedom, they crossed the Atlantic to the New World and established a settlement in Bethlehem in the colony of Pennsylvania. The Moravians continued their missionary work, and by the 1750s they had expanded into the colony of North Carolina. The group was granted 100,000 acres of land in what was then wilderness in North Carolina, an area that was given the name Wachovia. The Moravians quickly formed a plan for an outpost in the colony of North Carolina. In 1766, a group of 8 Moravian men began the task of clearing trees for their new settlement that would be called Salem. Salem would be the administrative center for the Wachovia area and was carefully planned. In fact, the street layout of Salem today remains pretty much unchanged. Exiting the visitor center, a covered bridge carries foot traffic across the Old Salem Road over to the Frank L. Horton Museum Center, adorned with Moravian stars for the Christmas season. This is the Single Brothers house. It's where single men lived until getting married. Steeples from the Moravian Church. Here's the Winkler Bakery. Christian Winkler came to Salem in 1807 to become the town's first baker. Let's go inside. He ran the business until 1827, when he turned it over to his son. The bakery remained within the Winkler family until 1927, an impressive 120 years. Then it was sold out of the family. The business continued operating as a bakery, closing in 1931. For the next 30 years, the building served several businesses, none of which was a bakery. Finally, in the 1960s, the building was acquired by the Old Salem Company. It was historically restored as a bakery and opened to the public in 1968. As one strolls through the town, it really does lend itself to giving one the sensation of traveling back in time. But the 21st century is never far away, as it invariably shows itself popping up just beyond the tree line. This rather lavish-looking building is the Bellow House. Wow, look at these old half-timber homes. They are some of the oldest homes in the settlement. Behind me is the giant Tin Teapa, one of the symbols of Old Salem. Fantastic. Built in 1858 by the brothers Samuel and Julius Mickey, Moravian descendants of the founders of Salem. This landmark originally stood as a sign in front of their tin shop at the corner of South Main and Bellow Street, which disappeared when the U.S. Highway 421 expressway was built. This amazing-looking home was built in 1868, just 3 years after the end of the American Civil War. Well, I'm not an expert. I'm guessing it was built in the Second Empire Victorian style. Beautiful. Walking back toward the town square, there are several half-timber buildings. This one made with brick and dating back to the late 1700s. Here's a neighboring home, which once served as the village apothecary, or the equivalent of a modern-day pharmacy. This is the Mish House, which was the home of Matthew Mish and his family. Built in 1771, it's older than the USA itself. I guess this is an 18th century version of a Moravian Christmas tree. In the back is a small beehive-style oven for baking bread and the like. Here's the family's small equipment barn. Back on the main street, there are definite signs of Christmas. I'm now back at the town square, here at the community pump, which was the town's sole source of water in the early days. And it looks like someone's cooking up lunch over there at the Winkler House on the corner of Main and West Street. On the east side of the town square is the campus of Salem College, which is worth a visit in its own right. I've made my way to the south end of town, and the site of the St. Phillips Church. In the early days, the only black people in the settlement were slaves, who were all owned by the church. While no formal schooling was provided to the slave community, many learned trades by working alongside the town's craftsmen. In the 1820s, the Moravians built a separate church for the slaves and began providing church services. They also began providing reading and writing classes at Sunday school. Today, St. Philip's looks like this. The church cemetery has many unnamed graves. Nearby is the site of the ReichHeg House. Lost to time, this facade might give you an idea of what the place once looked like. The home was built in 1831 by Emanuel Reich, here at the corner of Church and Race Streets. 20 years later, it was sold to George Hay in 1851, who expanded the home. Later, it was removed to make way for the Central School. Subsequently, the school was removed in the 1970s. The site has been excavated by archaeologists, and remnants of the foundation and a basement were unearthed and documented. However, today, not much remains of this historic home. One of the largest problems facing early farmers and craftsmen was getting their goods to the market. One particularly effective solution was the building of the Fayetteville and Western Plank Road. The road was completed and opened in 1854, providing the interior of North Carolina fast and effective access to the Cape Fear River and the world. Just as important, goods from the world could now easily reach Salem. The plank road spurred growth in the Salem region. But a decade later, other forms of transportation, mainly railroads, made the road obsolete and it faded from memory. With America now developed from coast to coast, it's hard to imagine a time when places like Winston-Salem were in the midst of a vast wilderness, when the land was covered with mile after mile of unbroken forest and grasslands. It was people like the Moravians and their settlements like Salem that opened up the interior of the continent, clearing the way for future settlers and development. Visiting places like Old Salem helps remind one what life was like in those early days and just how far we have come. It's time to think about returning home to Charlotte. So that's going to do it for today's Explore of Old Salem. Remember, life is a journey. Enjoy the ride, and thanks for watching.